course, why don't we start on the exterior? You know, you pull up in front of the house, and you always want to do that macro view, don't you?
Take a look at the house. It gives you some idea of what you're going to be looking at as you travel around on the right side, the left side. Well, it's a beautiful September day, isn't it?
It sure is, and that's going to be indicative maybe of a lot of leaves, a lot of growth here that you see overhanging the roof and in front of the home. That's sort of cause for concern, isn't it?
It is concerning, considering rather that you have a situation where the branches hanging out over the roof can, first of all, shade the roof from sun, and you can get growth on the roof surface. Also, the leaves can fall off naturally, go into the gutters and clog up the downspouts, let alone the problem that you might have if big branches fell off and fell onto the roof and did damage to the roof itself.
Now you're doing the micro view. Now that you've done the macro view, you're taking a look at the driveway. And I would say that at this point, the driveway is probably at life expectancy, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it's just an older asphalt driveway. We see a lot of these in the older neighborhoods. They're cracked, but they're not really all that, you know, they still may have a few years left. So we mentioned to our customer maybe just regular maintenance on the driveway would be advisable.
Here we're taking a close-up look at the front porch, and we see it's a masonry finish there, and it looks like we have a few issues with it. What do you see here?
Well, the first thing is the steps look uneven. The treads look certainly uneven. That top step there, you can see where it has fallen a little bit against the house. The paint and some of the little chipping and spalling on the top of the surface. I don't know that that's anything that's terribly something that needs to be repaired. Would you think that we would say anything about that, or just regular wear and tear commensurate with the age?
I would say you're absolutely right. Wear and tear commensurate with the age. You might want to engage your buyer with a discussion that, you know, they may want to consider resurfacing it just for the aesthetics, but you're right. It really is not a structural issue or anything to do with the home. However, when you get out to a closer look at the outer edges of this porch, we see somewhat what we would call a little bit of deterioration of the masonry, don't we?
Yeah, it looks to me like this is something that hasn't been maintained very well and has just deteriorated over a period of time. I would be logging that into the back of my mind when we get inside to see if the inside is sort of in the same shape. But as you go along this edge, you can see where the edge is deteriorated and broken off, and there's sort of pieces and parts laying here and there. But it looks like we're only about less than a foot off the ground, the edge of this patio. What does that mean?
Well, there's not a requirement of any handrails because it's so close to the grade. However, that may be a discussion that you may want to have with your buyer. Although it's not a requirement, it just for safety's sake, they may want to consider putting a handrail around the perimeter of the porch here. Again, just for safety. It isn't a requirement, but you want to have that discussion with the buyer about considering putting handrails around just for safety, so someone doesn't fall off the porch.
And you know, Ken, what I would always, in order to determine safety, on that back side of the porch, it kind of falls off. Now, the point of the matter is, if a small child or a grandfather or grandmother fell off that porch, is there a chance that they could be injured?
Oh, absolutely. It'd be easy to break a hip or any other bone, wouldn't it?
So maybe mentioning a guardrail on that side would be advisable for safety's sake, because as we know, no one will argue safety, will they?
That is correct. You may get pushback on some of the standards, but when it comes to safety, and you put that in your report, there's going to be very few times that you're going to get any pushback from anyone regarding safety. Now, here we have a good look at the riser, at the support columns here. holding the roof in place. And see the deterioration at the base of the column on this one, and the deterioration of the masonry along the edge there. So that might be cause for concern, would you say? How about this one here? It looks like it's almost off the edge of the porch.
Well, I think, as I remember, they were both a little loose. And we would check that in our home inspection. I wouldn't grab a hold of it and pull on it very hard, but just to give some idea of whether or not it's a load-bearing spot, and if it's working as it's designed to work. In this particular case, it is not. So I think that we would need to call in a qualified general contractor to make suggestions on what we need to do to this.
Yeah, you can see the indication where the column here used to be, and somehow over time we've had movement or it's been hit, but you can see that it's almost off the edge of the porch. So you're only getting partial support from that column, aren't you?
Yep. You know, we're coming around here. We've seen the handrail. There it is, going down. We're only allowed to be 4 inches, so that I think that it says, so a 4-inch sphere will not travel through, which is about your fist.
Yep. That's right.
Those look a little wide to me. I would call that out as a safety issue and have that repaired.
Now we're looking at the soffit beneath the overhang of the house.
Looks to me like we have some loose vinyl and it's bowing a little bit.
Yeah, we don't know why, but it's not really our job to determine why, is it? And here you can see it's obvious here as you get closer to it there. So you would report it and recommend repair and move on.
Right. This is not a horrible repair, probably, but they're going to have to take a lot of this loose and so forth, and that'll be that.
All right, here we're going into the left side of the home, and again, we do a macro view, and then we get into the micro view of the home.
I want you to look at those pipes that are sticking up. Now, those may or may not indicate something that is down underneath the ground, in particular, an oil tank. When we're doing an inspection and we suspect that there may have been an oil furnace in the house at one time, and that it still has those vent lines or fill lines above the ground, that puts us in a spot where we need to mention that in our report, don't we?
We sure do. And it's always good to give your buyer a heads up. Now, we can follow the piping and see if it comes into the interior. However, we still don't know if at one time there was a fuel oil tank buried when the home was initially built. So we can't see that. We can't see below grade. So it would absolutely be advisable that we give our buyer a heads up.
And what would happen, Ken, if that buried fuel oil tank had been leaking for several years, and we had a bunch of fuel oil in the soil around that house? Would that be an environmental concern that would be the EPA would want the owner of the house to clean up?
He sure would. Now it falls on the homeowner. So who's the homeowner going to call? First thing he's going to do is call his home inspector and ask, why didn't you point this out to me? And it's not a cheap undergo, is it? It's very expensive to have it removed and cleared.
Before we get past this little bump out that you see on the side of the house, there's probably 12 to 18 inches of distance between the bottom of that and the flower bed there, and you need to get down on your hands and knees and get down underneath and look at that and how that's covered and so forth, to make sure that whatever they've used, and oftentimes they'll just use plywood or OSB or something like that, and it's exposed, and sometimes it'll get wet and it'll start to rot, and that wouldn't be good, would it?
No, in fact, it'll start to deteriorate, especially if they don't have it sealed with paint or stain or something. And if it is plywood they use, it'll start to delaminate. And now it's an introduction for rodents to get right up into the interior walls of the home. And they can travel through the walls of a home this age they could possibly go all the way into the attic. Now they have an entranceway, their own private entranceway into the nice, warm, toasty area of the attic during the cold winter months. Now, as we come around, we see that we have a masonry chimney here. So what are some of the things we're going to be looking and thinking about when we're looking at this masonry chimney?
Well, the first thing, obviously, is the condition of the brick and the mortar. If we have any of the brick that has delaminated or any of the mortar that's missing, if you look down there to the right, you can see an exposed block turned on its side. It looks like it's the footer for the chimney itself. And we had a fairly long discussion trying to decide whether or not that was right or wrong. Did we ever come to a conclusion?
You always want to say what you see and write what you say. Is there an opportunity for moisture to get inside the CMU here that's acting as the foundation of our chimney? And what happens to water when it freezes?
Expands.
So it could actually cause some deterioration over time of the foundation block, couldn't it?
Probably a good idea to mention this in the report then, isn't it?
Probably so. And who would you recommend for repair?
I think I'm going to call a masonry contractor. Now we're going to go up the side of the house and look where the house is attached to the chimney itself, how they adjoin, make sure that there are no gaps or that the chimney hasn't pulled away from the house.
It looks pretty good there, doesn't it? What's that white stuff there that we see through the brick there you see on the left side?
Well, that looks like our old friend efflorescence. Whenever you see efflorescence, that tells you one thing, and that's that moisture has been there.
It sure has.
Efflorescence is the migration of moisture through a masonry product.
So this is something good for a home inspector to pick up on, isn't it?
And it may give us a clue when we get inside the house of something else.
It's a masonry chimney, and from the height of the chimney, I think the standard, so actually it's a requirement that if it's a masonry chimney and it's 12 feet above the last support, which here would be the roof area, it needs to have an auxiliary support, doesn't it?
Yep. When they're that high, they're suspect to several things, but we'll look at it from another angle. We want to look real close at this, make sure that it's square and plumb.
That's why I always carry a 4-foot level with me. Some guys will have a 6-foot level for the chimneys.
Looks to me like that chimney might be a little bit bowed. What do you think?
Yeah, it sure looks it. Plus, you notice we're missing a chimney cap. But Forrest, am I going to put a ladder up on that roof, lean it up against the chimney, and get on top and see what condition that crown is?
Well, I don't know whether you're going to, but I can tell you I'm not going to.
Right.
I'm doing a visual inspection, and I'm making sure that everything I do is safe.
Correct.
And I wouldn't think that would be very safe.
So equally as important as finding defects is putting in your report those things that are not accessible, that you can't see to evaluate. Is that correct?
That is correct. Some inspectors do some things that others don't do. It's always your decision. It's a business decision that you make, and there are several things, but getting up on the roof even is a decision that you'll have to make based upon whether you feel safe to do that. Then once you're up on the roof, whether you would put a ladder up against this chimney, that would be a decision that you would have to make. But I would say that most inspectors would probably not do that.
And I would support them in that case as well.
Now we can see the cap of the chimney doesn't overhang around the outside, does it?
Sure doesn't.
And what does that mean?
That means that it's not deflecting the moisture as it should. Moisture is going to be able to get right down through that wash, or through that crown that some may call it, through the top, to the interior of the chimney, through the lining, and could easily go down to the interior of the home, could go down into the fireplace, or whatever appliances that are connected into the chase of the chimney. So it's definitely a situation that could cause some disruption of the regular processes of the interior, couldn't it?
So it looks like we probably need to call someone to take a look at the chimney, don't we?
We sure do. So maybe a qualified professional or a mason, a qualified mason.
Well, the mason's going to rebuild it if it needs to be rebuilt, isn't he?
He sure is. Not much clearance between the foundation walls and that asphalt driveway.
No, it doesn't fall much. It looks like they had some old bushes they tore out, and it created an issue now in the grading around the house.
Yeah, and here's a close-up of that coal chute. Is this something maybe that you want to check and make sure that it's sealed properly and not able to be opened?
Absolutely. You don't want little critters to be able to get into the house, let alone moisture, do you?
That is correct. Here you see your communications equipment attached to the vinyl siding. It'll have its own bond and everything and its own grounding system on it.
Do we inspect that?
No, we don't. That's outside the standards of practice, both the ASHI standards of practice and the state of Ohio standards of practice. But you can see the green wire on the left side there going over to your ground rod there. So that tells us that it has been grounded. What are we looking at here on the foundation?
Looks like we have some mortar missing around that block, don't we?
It sure does.
Probably a good idea to mention that in the report.
What do we have here? What are we looking at here in the rear?
The electric service coming in, and that's where it's going into the house.
I see a pipe coming out of the foundation wall beside the electrical service. Forrest, what exactly are we looking at there?
Well, we'd have to go inside to verify, but that to me looks like it is a vent for the gas meter. We probably have an older home that has a gas meter on the inside of the house. Is that a defect, or is that something that we see often?
We see it often. And there's your electric meter. And as we're going up here, we'll see that it's overhead service, isn't it? So what are we looking at there?
Well, that's your mast and weatherhead, and then you have the wires that are coming into the house. There should be what's called a drip loop on those wires coming in, so that water can't travel down that wire and through the weatherhead and down into the electric panel.
Well, it looks like we have one wire that has a sufficient drip loop, but am I correct in seeing that we should have a drip loop in both the wires, or is that sufficient?
To me, it looks like there's enough loop there that it probably is sufficient.
Now we're looking at the back porch.
Right off the bat, looks like we have no handrail. And how many risers do you need to have a handrail if you have?
Well, the standards say 4 or more, and we definitely have 4 here, don't we?
Yes, we do.
So you'd recommend handrails, and you'd recommend railing around the porch, wouldn't you?
That's right, because this is high enough off the ground that that would be a real safety issue. So we need to have guardrails around the outside and handrails down the steps as well.
Now we're taking a look at the condition of that stoop, and I see some cracking in the foundation wall there for the stoop, and it looks like we have some cracking in the surface of the stoop itself there, the masonry, and a little bit of damage here to the side with cracking that you'll see here. So is this going to be an issue, something that you're going to call out for us, or what would you say to your buyer in a situation like this?
Well, that's kind of a tough one. The simple thing to say would be that the concrete needs replaced, and then you would have to, it has an awning over the top of it, you'd have to support the awning. There always comes the argument that it's wear and tear commensurate with its age. So if you have a house that's 50, 60 years old, the concrete has a few cracks. Now that corner is another thing that's cracked off like that. That's pretty significant. But there would be some that would write this up again as just normal wear and tear and leave it at that.
And some are going to recommend maybe evaluation and with possible replacement, or maybe even could put in the report, recommend budgeting for future replacement.
I think that'd be good advice, and that's probably where we should go for since we're going to go ahead and put handrails and guardrails up anyhow.
There's no grandfathering for safety, is there?
Nope, there is not. There's the awning that I was talking about. It's just an old awning. How do we know whether or not this thing leaks or not?
Well, you don't really. You might be able to notice if there's any indications where it meets the wall, but you're really not going to know unless it's raining that day. So, and it's a visual inspection, and you can only report what you know for a fact, can't you?
Yep, and it looks like it's an older awning by just looking at the stains and so forth on it. So it may be that the awning just stays.
And in fact, I don't think, according to the standards of practice, that we're required to report on awnings, are we? Neither the standards of practice for ASHI nor the state of Ohio.
Yeah, we don't really have to unless we have a safety issue.
Right. Now, here's soffit. See the loose soffit that we have at the top there. This one is really hard to see, and it was really hard to find on this home. But that's something that you definitely want to put in your report, correct?
Correct.
All right. Now, as we're traversing, we're going to go to the HVAC section here. Tell me what we're looking at.
Well, you've got an older air conditioner. At first look, you'd look at something like this and say, wow, that thing's got to be pretty old. We'll look at the data plate here in a minute, and it's going to tell us that this air conditioner was manufactured in 1991. That's when this thing was put in. 1991 to 2020. My goodness, we're talking about almost 30 years old. Well, that the unit certainly is beyond its designed and useful life. It's a little bit hard there on the left to see, but you can see 5191. That is where it's encrypted in the serial number.
So this unit was probably manufactured the 51st week of 1991.
That's what it looks like to me.
And in the model number there, the HS18 tells us that it's a ton and a half, correct?
Correct.
Well, how do you arrive at that?
Just remember to look for the middle of either the model number or the serial number, any number divisible by 12. And we're going to multiply or divide it by 12. In this particular case, 18 gives us a ton and a half.
With the 12,000 being the BTUs equivalent to 1 ton.
Correct.
So 12,000 would be 1 ton. 18,000 would be a ton and a half.
Correct.
Got it.
Now again, here we have this old air conditioner, and the point of the matter is, what is it we're going to say about the air conditioner? Well, the chances are your report is going to say that it is at or certainly beyond its useful and designed life, and basically what that means is that it's had it. And you would look at this air conditioner and you would think, well, I don't know, this thing can't be working because it's so old. But interestingly enough, we turned this air conditioner on and it came right on and started cooling the house.
Yeah, and what is the standard? The standard rule of thumb is what, 14 to 20 degrees difference?
But somewhere between 15 and 20, around there. Differential, if you are doing a temperature differential test, but we only test the air conditioner when the temperature on the outside is what?
Warm.
65 degrees. 65 degrees.
Or above.
Now you can look on the right-hand side. You see the suction line, which is the larger line of the two, the line set. The insulation is missing. You'll see this an awful lot. It's a simple repair, but still, it's a defect and needs to be called out.
Who would you recommend that do the repair on that?
Qualified heating and cooling contractor.
Ah, okay. Now we're looking at the right side of the home. Pretty nice from the street, isn't it?
Yeah, it's consistent. It has vinyl siding and masonry foundation. Has got some missing mortar all the way around the house in many different areas. Just a little help with your report writing, and that is, rather than pick every area and identify each little area, there's a pretty good one right there that's got looks like a crack going through. But rather than say on the right side there's a crack, on the left side there's a crack, on the back, in the middle, wherever it may be, it probably would be good advice to write into your report that there are cracks throughout the foundation. Mm-hmm. And then you wouldn't have to write down every location and write a report that's very, very long.
That sounds reasonable. Basement windows. Do you think we have enough clearance here beneath the basement windows to the grade?
Some would say yes, some would say no. I know what I would say in my report. What would you say, Ken?
I'd say it would probably benefit with window wells.
Would be better designed with window wells, wouldn't it?
Sure would, especially in the Midwest for snow loads. Because when that snow melts, it's going to get right into your window framing, isn't it? And here we see the grading right up to the window sill here on the outside. Not a good sight.
Now, as we come here to this downspout on the corner of the house, you can see the splash block underneath and the fact that it's moved a little bit. It's not quite lined up. But we teach that we should have a 5 or 6 foot extension away from the house, don't we?
That is correct.
Now, if you extend this 5 or 6 feet away from the house, Ken, and you go to mow the grass, somebody's not going to be happy about that, are they?
That's right. Plus, you don't know where the property line is. In this situation here, the homes are fairly close to each other. So imagine if everybody, all the neighbors, run their extensions 5 feet out or 6 feet out from their foundation. Now everybody is getting their neighbors' water wash, aren't they?
They are. And I'm not telling you that you shouldn't write in the report that it should be extended 5 to 6 feet. I'm not saying that isn't what you should do, but I will tell you this. In this particular case, the grade falls pretty quickly away from the house, and we do have a splash block in close proximity. So my question is, do you think most or all the water is getting away from the foundation?
Some of it is.
You have some that isn't, some that is.
Yeah.
So you can make a decision. I'm not telling you not to do that, but what I'm telling you is try to keep in mind when you're going around a house. What is the reason that we say that risers should be even on steps, or that a porch that's over 30 inches should have a guardrail around it? There's a reason for it.
Now this is a close-up of the foundation there on the right side of the building, and you'll see that we have mortar missing. And I love your comment, Forrest, about instead of trying to pinpoint all the different locations of the cracks or the missing mortar, you can actually say in your report, noted throughout the foundation walls, and recommend for repairs.
And this should be in your report.
Absolutely. And you should tell them who is going to do the repairs, and here you see a close-up of one. And is it important to tell them when the repairs should be made?
Always before the language they always like to use is before the close of escrow, or also before the end of the inspection period.
Right.
Before you close, it should be done.
Now we're giving you a close-up here of the downspout, and it's a known fact that the seam is always in the back of the downspout, isn't it?
Yes.
And if there were some damage, maybe at one time the water is frozen and it's cracked at that seam in the rear, a home inspector may never find that unless he's doing the home during a rainy day. Is that correct?
That's correct. And would we be held responsible then if that downspout were damaged but not visible?
No, it's just not visible. But I can tell you this, that a good home inspector is going to be looking at the back of the downspouts as well.
Looks like I just saw a nail. Did I just see a nail sticking out of that gutter?
You sure did. It's starting to come loose, isn't it?
Yep, those need to be tightened up, don't they?
They sure do. That definitely goes in your report, doesn't it?
Yes. Yes. See a little hole there to the right of the window in the siding? So we do have some damage to the siding. That should be in your report as well.
Well, do I need to tell them if it's probably caused by a lawnmower?
If you need to, but quite honestly, I'm not interested in why. I'm just interested in that there's a hole there.
Absolutely. We don't diagnose, do we?
Nope, we don't diagnose and we don't prescribe.
You see another hole there beside one of the other windows. But you do want to report that there's damage noticed in the siding.
Moisture intrusion, bugs can get through there. It's just not good. Needs to be repaired.
Now let's get onto the roof or take a look at the roof. What kind of roof are we looking at?
Well, this looks like fiberglass asphalt shingles. 3-tab, we call them. This particular type of a Cape Cod home, we have a pretty good pitch in this roof, don't we?
We sure do. So we're not even gonna attempt to walk on it, are we?
No, but would it be okay if I put a ladder up on the gutter and looked at it up on the eaves?
Sure would. And the standards of practice say you don't have to walk the roof, but you do have to identify the roof covering and how you inspected it. That's a requirement from the ASHI standards of practice and the state's standards of practice.
I was just looking here at this picture on the right, about halfway up there. That looks like we've got a shingle that's missing quite a few granules. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it looks like it is. I see it in one of the previous shots as well, a few nail pops in the surface too.
What are those granules put onto a shingle for?
Actually, it's to reflect the ultraviolet rays of the sun, isn't it? Sort of like the protective layer of the shingle.
And if we start to lose them, then that would indicate that we have shingles that are wearing out.
That is correct. Do we need to tell them the age of the roof, how old the roof is?
We need to give them some idea, but I would not get into trying to say exactly how old the roof is.
Right, because it's really hard to tell, isn't it?
Especially with with a dimensional shingle, it's very difficult.
But at least we can tell them the life expectancy of a 3-tab fiberglass asphalt shingle, can't we? We can give them that information for sure.
We can.
Because they're averages in the industry. And this type of a shingle, I think it's decided in the industry that the life expectancy is somewhere between 15 and 20 years?
Yeah, it is not, certainly if you have a 20 or a 25-year shingle, they're not going to last 20 or 25 years. It's not likely that their life is that long. But what I did want to mention about what we're looking at right here is this is from the ground. This would be what a pair of binoculars would look like looking at the roof. And we also have a ridge vent. Now, I want to bring that to your attention because we're going to see something here in a little bit that will buy into that a little bit. And but the ridge vent, of course, is part of the attic ventilation, the exhale. The hot air goes out through the top, and the cooler air comes in from the bottom. And the perfect attic ventilation is where you have a good combination of low inhale and high exhale. So we do have a ridge vent here, and it's been installed on the roof.
And our calculations tell us that 50% of the airflow in that attic should be on the low part of the roof, and 50% the exhale you're talking about on the upper part of the roof, right?
Right.
Okay, let's get into the attic, see what we find. Well, this has a stairway leading up to the attic, and what's missing there right off the bat?
No handrail.
Is it necessary, even though you're going up into the attic of a home?
Absolutely. That is a safety issue.
Now, we're looking at insulation.
That says R13. What's that mean?
That means that's your insulation factor. Insulation is rated by the inch, and the higher the R factor, the R number, the better it is as far as an insulator.
And I see some insulation on the floor there also. So we just went by what was between the joists here. We would have R13. Don't we want to have R30 or greater?
Yeah, in fact, a flooring like this where you have heated area beneath, you want to have a minimum of R30. In the ceilings, like you're looking at here, today in the attic, the minimum is, depending on the location in the Midwest, it runs anywhere from R40 to R50 rating insulation in the attic. Now with this Cape Cod, this brings a little different scenario to us, doesn't it? So you may not reach that R40 or that R50 rating, but you can see that we have an R13 in between the rafter joists and that possibly in between the ceiling joists at the base.
So it still might be good advice to upgrade the insulation, do what we call an energy upgrade. Would that be good advice?
Absolutely, sure would. Let your buyer know what they're getting into. Always set your buyer's expectations. Let them know what they're looking at, what they're getting into. Here you see it. Facing will burn. Do not leave exposed.
Cover with approved building material. So this is incorrect also.
That is correct. That is correct. And this is the manufacturer. This is not you or me saying it, is it? It's the manufacturer saying. Now, according to the standards of practice, we have to report the structure of the home. So what kind of structure are we looking at here in the attic?
Well, these are rafters. These were hand cut on the spot and put up onto a ridge board. So that's what those are.
Right. Now I see a collar tie there, and I see one like maybe spaced every, 1, 2, 3, 4, every fifth bay. What are collar ties designed to do?
Well, they're to hold the roof so it doesn't squash.
So prevent rafter movement, right?
Right.
So we probably need a little more of these installed, wouldn't you say? And rather than just having one every 6 or 8 feet apart?
I would say so. Would I need to know how far they should be spaced apart and talk to my customer and say and give them that information? Or would I be just enough for me to call for a qualified general contractor to come in and put up the collar ties as needed? Which would be the better way to do it?
Well, I'd want a professional to come in and do an evaluation. And while we're looking at this, take a look at the span. Now, these are 2x6 rafters and 2x6 ceiling joists. So take a look at the span. And right off the bat, do you think they might have a little bit of overspanning situation?
Yeah, it looks like the span. Those are going quite a distance, aren't they?
Yeah, for 2x6s. So what might be, and again, for the education side of it, what might the general contractor recommend be installed?
Well, one of two things: either a purlin, a mid-span support, or a knee wall.
Okay.
And if you're going to finish this space, that knee wall would probably be the preferable one to put in. Looks like they jammed this insulation between those joists. Is that the way you're supposed to install insulation?
Well, you lose your insulation value, don't you? Your thermal blanket. When you compact the insulation like that, you're losing a lot of that thermal blanket, aren't you?
We need a contractor to come in here and make suggestions on tightening it up, more insulation perhaps, and for the structure, don't we?
We sure do. And here you can see some of the efflorescence around the chimney connection there. And you see here that there's definitely been some leakage around that chimney, hasn't there?
There has. Hard to know whether or not that's a current leak or not. Not a pretty good reason to carry a moisture meter with you, isn't it?
Sure is. Although you're outside the standards of practice, aren't you? The ASHI standards of practice say that any instruments that you use like that is going to be beyond the standards of practice, isn't it?
Correct, because the standard is a minimum standard. Now, and to go beyond the standard is a decision that you'll make. But there's something called standard of care. And standard of care basically says that if your competition is using a moisture meter, then it's probably a pretty good idea that you use one as well.
This is typical what you're going to find in the attic there, isn't it, on the right?
Well, and everybody says, well, nobody goes up in that attic anyhow. What's the big deal?
All you need is one time for one person to go up or a little kiddo to go up and mess with that wiring and get shocked, and then it's going to be too late, isn't it? Now we're going from the attic, we're going downstairs into the interior. And as we go in the rooms, just the rule of thumb for us, what are those things that we're going to be looking at in every room that we enter?
Well, you're going to be looking at doors. You're going to be looking at windows. You're going to be looking at electric outlets, into the closets. Turn the switch on, check the light, check the fan, look at the floor, ceiling, and walls. Just a sort of a logical path all the way around and check it out. Do we check every window? Do we check every door? Do we check every outlet? How about that?
Well, the standards of practice say only a certain amount, and a minimum standards say one window per room, one outlet per room, or one receptacle rather per room. But a good home inspector, if it's a vacant home, or if he can get to the windows, he's going to check every one he can get to, isn't he?
I would say check every one in a house like this. Now, I just noticed in that picture that just went by, it looked like there was some trim, some wood that was laying on the floor. This house is sort of in the latter stages of being redone, isn't it?
It sure is. So would you not report on something like the bathroom is not totally finished? Would you not report on the condition, or how would you address that in your report?
I think in the report you write down that the house is in the midst of construction, that we're missing plates and we're missing trim, and the bathroom may be incomplete or whatever it is. We report the house in the condition that it's in the day we do the inspection, because if we don't, then a year, 2 years down the road, somebody finds something and they want to know how come you didn't find it, or how come you didn't mention it in your report, and perhaps it was under construction at the time when you did the inspection.
Hey, Forrest, remember that efflorescence that we saw on the exterior chimney brick?
Mm-hmm.
This is the inside wall adjacent to it. What are we looking at here?
Looks like a pretty good leak.
Sure does.
So we need to determine, first of all, whether the leak is a current leak, an active leak, or not. So this is a perfect application for that moisture meter, isn't it?
It sure is. And again, just like you said, although it's beyond the standards of practice, there's a standard of care. And if everybody in your market is using moisture meters, then by golly, you better be using a moisture meter too. But we can see this as evidence, and looking on the outside was our red flag, wasn't it? So this really bears it out on the inside.
Yeah, we have had a pretty good leak here.
Not unusual that they try to paint it and cover it up, is it?
Doesn't work though.
Now let's take a look at the fireplace.
Oh, it's covered up. There's that's paint, and we can't get to the fireplace. So we should move all that stuff out of the way so that we can do it, right?
If you want to, fine. But let me tell you, the standards of practice say that that's not necessary. You don't have to move anything. You don't have to take carpeting up. You don't have to take pictures off the walls. You don't have to remove personal stored items. And in a situation like this, if it were one bucket in the way, I'd probably consider moving it out of my way. But here, you're absolutely right, Forrest. It's totally blocked with storage, so I'm not going to bother with it, are you?
The standards actually use the words visual and non-intrusive, which
Right.
means we look at it, and if we can't see it, then we can't comment on it.
Right, and it says readily accessible, doesn't it?
Now, am I going to write down that I couldn't see the fireplace and why?
You sure are. Equally important as finding this defect here in the wall is writing in the report what you're not able to inspect. And we are not able to inspect that fireplace.
So that should be in the report, shouldn't it?
It sure should. And see the wrinkling here on the drywall covering the fireplace. Again, more indications of moisture intrusion. Here's a great view showing. I wonder, were they trying to keep us from inspecting that fireplace? You think there might be more going on in there?
No, of course not.
A homeowner would never do that.
They would never do that. No, absolutely not.
And here's a close-up view. Can you see the staining going on in the drywall right adjacent to your fire brick here?
And moisture's run clear down the wall on the inside.
Sure is. Probably going to manifest itself all the way down in the basement, isn't it?
Probably does. Now into the bathroom. First thing is probably a good idea when you go into the bathroom is first look underneath the sink to make sure that the plumbing's all hooked up before you start turning the water on.
Especially in a vacant home, huh?
Especially in a vacant home.
You'll do that once and you'll remember it.
Well, as the water runs over your feet, you'll run to the car to get your towels out. And you look there to the right, it looks like some unfinished construction inside of here. Yeah, you can see we're in process. There's some things that aren't done in here yet, but there are some things that are done. And what I wanted to start to talk to you about was doing what's called a functional flow test, and that is turn the sink on, flush the toilet, turn on the shower, and see if the pressure stays constant, especially in an older home like this that may still have some galvanized plumbing in it.
So what's the big deal with galvanized plumbing?
Well, it crusts up on the inside and cuts down on the flow of water and gets to the point where it can actually shut the line completely down.
So if you have a trickle of water coming out there in a home this age, very well could be that there's still some old galvanized lines. Huh?
Could be. We're checking the shower surround to make sure that everything is caulked around the tub. You can see there it is, but we've got a problem with.
Looks like
we've got a problem. First of all, we got the hot water on the wrong side.
Hot water is always on the
left.
Yeah.
And the handle is missing there. So that would be something we want to put in the report.
Absolutely. Let's move on to the kitchen. Because this was a vacant home, we did the same thing here. Before we turned that water on, we opened the cabinet beneath to make sure that it was connected. What are we looking at here?
Well, there's a piece of flex. It used to be that we used to say that if flex ran vertical, it was okay, didn't we?
Yeah, I believe that's the rule today, isn't it? As long as it's not at an angle or off to a degree, as long as it's straight up and down, I believe that's approved, isn't it?
That's how I understand it. But there are some that would call this out as a defect.
Now, you notice one of the requirements is that we have a shutoff for the water supply. That's a requirement, isn't it?
Yes.
So in an older home like this that hasn't been renovated, if you see the lines directly connected without a shutoff, you're writing that up as a defect, correct?
Correct. Looking for signs of moisture, leakage. This is a new cabinet, so this looks okay. We don't have a garbage disposal on this, and we don't have a dishwasher hooked up to it. So basically we have a drain and a hot and cold water coming down, which all look okay.
And we have shutoffs.
Now we're looking at the microwave. And this is a built-in microwave. What does that mean, Ken?
That means it's to be inspected. And what a lot of guys will do is they may carry a little cup with them, put a little water in the cup and put it in the microwave for 15 seconds and warm it up. Some guys will take a paper towel and just moist a paper towel, put it in for 5 or 6 seconds, and if it's warm, that's sufficient, isn't it?
It is.
Now we're doing the cabinetry. You want to make sure that the cabinets are secured to the wall. You're looking for the screws, and you don't want them to be drywall screws, do you?
Nope. Shelves need to be in place. Doors need to open and shut.
Drawers need to open and close just according to the way the manufacturer required them to be, correct?
Functional.
Here we're testing the GFI. So with our tester, it tripped. So that tells us that it works okay, wouldn't you say?
I would.
The only thing here that we're going to write up as a defect is the missing cover, correct?
Are we required to carry that little tool and stick that into every outlet?
Well, see there again, you're going outside the standards of practice. The ASHI standards of practice say that that's not necessary. You don't have to do that. However, like you pointed out earlier, the standard of care is that anybody in your market, if everybody in your market is using a GFCI tester, you better be using one. And that in our market is for sure, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Now let's go from here down into the basement. This is where it all happens for us.
We have a staircase coming down with a landing halfway down.
You think that's sufficiently supported?
Well, look at the picture on the left. Do you think maybe there might have been a support at one time that went down and rested on the basement floor?
Might have been, but regardless, it sure isn't properly supported today, is it?
No, not in my view. It's not.
How about the openings between the risers there in the steps? It's an unfinished basement. Is that a requirement?
Well, whether it's a requirement or not, I think that they're safer if they were covered in the back. Would that be a true statement?
Sure would be safer, especially with the little kittles, huh?
Yeah.
That could crawl through and fall through. I don't see any handrail either, do you?
No, I do not. Looks like we have a door that's blocked on that landing. Are we going to move all that stuff out of the way, or are we going to just say that we can't get to it and we don't open it up?
I'm going to say in my report that it's being blocked and it was not accessible.
Notches in the floor joist. Good or bad?
Oh, it's bad. Now, some will say as long as it's in the middle third, it's okay. Or is it
Outside.
at the bottom?
In the outside thirds. Never in the middle.
Never in the middle. Good. But we're going to report it as being notched, aren't we?
We are. And we're going to look closely to see if there's any other notches in the basement as we travel around in the basement as well, aren't we?
Right. And that notch is going to bring our attention to see if there's any cracking or anything going on in that floor joist for any damage that was caused maybe by them.
So now we're looking up at the bathroom, at the tub.
Looking at the tub drain, aren't we?
We are. Making sure that the wood is in good shape and we don't... Uh-oh. What's this?
Boy, you can tell we've had prior leakage, haven't we? Now here is where you're going to use your moisture meter, determine if it's something that is fairly new or if it's old, that might have been, the leak might have been repaired. You don't know it unless you put your moisture meter on it and get your readings.
You know, I bought this tool called an awl. Would this be a place where I would use that to probe to see if the wood was rotten?
You sure could.
That's good because I haven't used it yet.
Well, this would be the perfect place to try it out, for sure. Now let's look at that furnace, the HVAC system. What do we have going into the chimney chase here?
Well, that's your vent coming from the furnace, and it's a single wall vent. And as we're looking at it, this looks to me like, just first look, looks like an older furnace. And I'm looking, it says Lennox. What was the brand of the air conditioner?
It was Lennox also, wasn't it?
So I'll bet you we may have a match set. This is some of the supply and return, the vent work. And as we go up and look at what's called the boot that goes up into the floor, we have what we probably know as asbestos. Looks like a known asbestos material that is still left on the ductwork from the old furnace.
Yeah.
Is this an issue?
It sure could be, but we don't know for sure if it contains asbestos unless you take a sample and send it off to the lab. But my rule of thumb has always been to sort of fall on the side of safety. How about you?
Well, here's what I used to say to my customers. If you look at a duck and it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, what is it?
It's probably a duck.
Probably a duck. Does this look like asbestos?
Sure does.
Is this where they used to put asbestos?
Sure is.
Well, then it's probably asbestos, isn't it?
Could very well be.
Could very well
Absolutely.
be. So that's the way I used to approach it, and I would talk to my customer about the asbestos and the variety of asbestos that we are concerned about, which is, by definition, friable. What does friable mean?
It means that, like you see here, where you have some damage to it, where the particles could actually become airborne. That's when it becomes dangerous, is when the particles can become airborne into the air. You with the air conditioner on or the furnace running, it could suck that into the ductwork and spread it throughout the house. Now you have an issue not only on the ductwork in the basement, but you have an issue with asbestos being spread throughout the house, don't you? When it's friable.
Yes. Yes. And years ago, when we used to use asbestos, we were not aware of the long-term effects, were we?
Yeah, well, we get smarter as we get older, correct?
Supposed to. There's your line set again from the air conditioning. And you see the condensation on that bigger line?
Yeah, the bigger line is the suction line, isn't it?
It is the suction line. And if the air conditioning is running and you put your hand on that suction line, should it be cold or should it be warm?
It should be cold.
It should be cold. And I can tell you that this suction line was very cold. And that's why it's condensing. Once again, just indicating that we have an air conditioner that actually is working pretty well. But that should be covered with insulation.
That is right. There, your water heater. Forrest, take a look at this connection, the vent connector from the water heater into the supply route there, or the exhaust route. What are we taking away from this?
Well, I see several things here. First of all, if you look at the vent, that vent's going straight into that other vent, into a T. There should be an elbow or something that softens that flow of that products of combustion from that hot water heater into that vent.
Right.
Second thing is, I see an electric wire laying on that hot vent. That can't be right.
No, actually, not good for the electrical wiring, is it?
Nope.
Plus, that vent connector coming from that water heater and the exhaust, isn't that supposed to have an incline like a 1/4 inch per foot?
It's supposed to have a 1/4 inch per foot to enhance the flow of the products of combustion up and out.
Yeah,
and this looks pretty flat, doesn't it?
It sure does. I don't think we have that. How should that go in to share the connection here from the furnace? What is the proper configuration?
Well, the proper configuration is you determine of all the devices which one has the most BTUs. And that one should be the lowest in the group that goes in, and it should push all of the rest that are a higher BTU. So the furnace, we have a furnace that, let's say it's 70 or 80,000 BTUs, and a hot water heater that is 40,000 BTUs. So we should have the furnace down low and the hot water heater up above.
Always a smaller one on top is what you're saying.
Big boy always pushes little boy.
Yep. And this total connection is wrong because the exhaust coming from that water heater is going to hit the back of that the wall there where it's connected. So that's improper every which way to go, isn't it?
Well, it can go left.
Yeah.
Back toward the furnace.
Here you see more condensation on the suction line from the air conditioner. This can become an issue, can't it?
Especially in a finished basement.
Now, the standards of practice say we have to report what kind of fuel that we're using here. So what kind of furnace do we have?
We have a gas forced air furnace. And we're going to take the front off of this, and we're going to look inside for the data plate and gather whatever information we can as far as the size and the age and so forth. I think that we determined that this was a matched set according to the serial number. We went to buildercenter.org to look it up. 75,000 BTUs.
Oh.
Typically, manufacturers, the burners are 20 to 30,000 BTUs per burner. So this has probably 3, maybe 4 burners. So we have 3 25,000 BTUs each, and these are called ribbon burners. Ribbon burners blow straight up into a clamshell heat exchanger. This is an older furnace, a low efficiency furnace, 60 or 70% efficient when it was put in. Mm-hmm. Who knows what the efficiency is now? And this furnace is only for vertical installation, not for horizontal. Looks like a little rust on the inside of the cabinet.
So we've had a little bit of corrosion get in there, haven't we?
Probably have a venting issue and condensation. As we travel up, we see we do not have an inducer fan, which a mid or high efficiency furnace would have, that would also give us an indication that we have a low efficient older furnace, 25, 30 years old at least.
And what's the average life expectancy, general in the industry, of a gas-fired appliance like this?
Well, it's different all over the place. It depends on who you're talking to, but I think that we generally say 15 to 18, 18 to 22 years, 15 to 20 years, if they are properly maintained.
20, 25 years, anywhere through there.
Yep. But I think we can pretty much determine that this furnace, like the air conditioner, is beyond its design and useful life. We also see no data that tells us that it's been regularly maintained. And with that, we are going to call for a qualified heating and cooling contractor to come in and check the whole system.
Absolutely. And when should they have it done?
For the end of the inspection period.
Good. And here we see the filter. What's significant? Is there a proper way of installing a filter?
There is. There's an arrow, and this arrow is probably either in the middle or on the bottom of this, but the arrow always points to the furnace.
So when I'm doing my inspection and I'm finding that it's pointing the opposite direction, I'm going to take that filter out and put it in correctly, right?
I don't know whether I do that or not.
Oh,
because it's been in there for quite a long time. If you turn it around, then you're probably going to push all the dirt off of it and recirculate in the house.
Oh, right through the system, huh? So that's probably not a good thing to do.
No, I'd report that it was in backwards. I wouldn't fix it.
Plumbing. Now we're going to look at what do we have on the left? My goodness, this is in the basement of a home.
There's your gas meter, and you can see down left at the bottom, there's the shutoff.
And on the right, we have a close-up view of that shutoff.
Correct. Because in our report, we have to identify the point of where we shut off the gas, right?
Correct.
Where we shut off the water.
Yes.
Where we shut off the electric.
That is correct for all three. So is this propane or natural gas?
This is natural gas. Propane usually is in a tank that's sitting in the backyard.
So here we're looking at the water meter, are we?
This is the water meter, yes. And I want to bring to your attention, first of all, this is where you turn the water off. You can see the valve right there on the right-hand side. That's where you shut the water off to the whole house. The other thing is, oftentimes, the electric system is grounded to plumbing. And if it's grounded to plumbing, if you look to the right of the valve, you'll see
a little clamp.
There's a clamp there. And you look on the left side, there's a clamp on the other side.
I see it.
But no wire connecting the two.
Oh.
Now, the problem we have here is that meter has got plastic and so forth that's inside of it, that if we want the ground to go from wherever we're grounding and whatever we're grounding all the way into the ground, we have to do what's called jump the meter with a wire. If that meter is not jumped, then that negates any ground on the plumbing, doesn't it?
Because plastic is not a conductor of electricity, is it?
That's correct. That's correct.
So you're writing this up as a defect, I believe, correct?
Well, we did find that we have a main ground on the outside of the house. So it would not be necessary to ground it on the inside with a ground outside.
In a home this age, correct?
Correct. Old cast plumbing.
Ouch.
Looks like something's been leaking.
Even I can find stuff like this.
This should be written into your report.
And here's where we're using your moisture meter and probably your new probe. This is the second place you've been able to use your probe today.
Boy, it made my day.
What on the left there? That looks like an old galvanized elbow, or is that possibly some old lead configuration there on the left?
I'm not sure I know one way or the other, but it's old plumbing, and we have several different kinds of plumbing that are being tied into each other. Got some leakage, and that's what happens when you do PVC into cast and all kinds of stuff like that. We have problems.
And I see some old galvanized connections there too.
Yep. Now you have your hot water heater, and look at those leads going into the top of that tank. Isn't there something that says that we should be coming out of that tank with so many inches of solid before we go to flex?
I believe it is up to 12 inches, isn't it? Depending on the manufacturer.
I think you're right.
What's that thing on the right side of that tank there that you see sticking out?
That's called the temperature and pressure relief valve. They call it a TPR valve. That saves you from that blowing out the back of your house. That controls the pressure inside the tank. If it gets too much, then it'll flow out and down through that extension down to the floor.
So all I have to do is just pull up on that little blue lever there at the end of it to inspect and test it?
Sure, if you want to replace it, don't touch that, whatever you do, because you'll get little pieces of sediment that'll go into there and seep in there. It'll drip forever, and then your customer's going to want to know why it didn't drip before you did the inspection. So we're not going to test the TPR valve.
What's the yellow thing on the left side there? That little yellow knob.
That's the shutoff. Should be a shutoff in close proximity and in the same room. Now you'll notice down to the right, that is the drain. Hot water heater should be drained every so often to get maximum life out of it. And also that white tube going down is the TPR extension that goes down, and it should go down to within about 6 inches of the floor. And it should be the approved material, and what an approved material would be: copper, black pipe, galvanized pipe, or rated PVC.
Okay, so you told me that on the left side is my gas shutoff. Down below the connection where it goes into the water heater, I have another piece of pipe hanging down there. Can I just cap that bad boy off or take it off and be done with it?
What you're talking about is the drip leg. Every device should have what's called a drip leg.
If it's a gas unit,
if it's a gas appliance. What that drip leg does is, as the gas passes by and goes into that gas valve, it has sediment and moisture in it, and that will fall down into that drip leg. The sediment will stay there, and the moisture will eventually dissipate, and that's what it's for. It's to clean the gas.
Oh, I understand. What's a black knob for on that white unit there, the control box there?
That's the thermostat to turn the hot water up or down according to what you like. A lot of people usually use it on the middle setting. It gets too hot, you can scald yourself, and there usually is a vacation setting where you can turn it down to the point where it just keeps it at a minimal heat while you're gone.
And the temperature that is most recommended is, I think the water temperature should be around 120 degrees, no more.
Yeah, if you get too much more than that, it can be uncomfortable. Look top right, you can see, looks like October 2015. So we have a 5-year-old hot water heater. It also tells us that it is 34,000 BTUs and that it is 40 gallons. That's the information that we have. Of course, it runs on natural gas. So a 5-year-old hot water heater is still got a good amount of useful life, does it not?
Yeah, it sure does. I think the average life expectancy of a water heater, both gas and electric, somewhere between 8 and 12 years average.
In there somewhere, yes.
Okay. And to the left, also here, we see the minimum clearances recommended by the manufacturer, don't we? Gives us clearances on the sides, above, and in front of the unit. And it also tells where it can be installed. It can be installed in an alcove or in a closet.
On combustible material.
Right. Oh, the electrical. This is where a lot of guys get lost for us.
And this looks like it's a Pushmatic panel.
What's the big deal with Pushmatic?
Well, a Pushmatic panel is an older panel. Many of them they don't make any longer. So we would call this panel antiquated. And there's your main breaker. One of the things that we have to determine is how big the electric panel is, don't we? What the amperage is.
What are we looking at here?
We're looking at the grounds and the neutrals coming in to the bus inside of the panel itself. And we see on the right-hand side there, you can see where you have 2 wires going underneath 1 screw.
Yeah, I see one of them white and one of them bare copper. So what's the big deal there?
We never double lug to a neutral. Neutrals have to be under a screw by themselves.
Oh, so the white wires don't like to share.
they do not.
So as we're looking at, it looks pretty clean other than for the double lugging, doesn't it?
Yes, not excessively dirty or rusty.
Well, I see some old wire there for us there on the left side. That looks like an old cloth. What was that brand name? Was it the old Romex type? Is that what it was called? The cloth covering the old.
I believe so, yes.
So really, you could sum this electrical panel up with one word: antiquated.
This was an interesting find. You can see we have a clamp that's been taken apart with a copper wire in it that is going to the right toward the panel. This panel was grounded to the plumbing in the house, and at one point or another, probably when they were doing some replumbing, they took it loose and never hooked it back up again.
Is that a bad thing?
That is a bad thing. Fortunately, we have a ground on the outside of the house that's grounding the system. But this would actually act more as a bond inside the house, and whatever it was supposed to do, it isn't doing.
So we're writing that up as a definite defect then, right?
And this one, you better find, and it's a great find.
Now, the connection we see to the left of this, is that a proper connection? That looks like that has plumber's tape. Is that what you call that? That is strapped onto the pipe? Is that okay?
No, that can't be a good ground against that pipe. It can't be tight enough.
Sort of like a homeowner.
Yep, or a plumber fix that didn't have a clamp in his truck. Terminated wire needs to be in an approved junction box, doesn't it?
Sure does. It's not just good enough to have them tapped off with wire nuts, is it? They have to be inside a junction box and terminate there.